Warriors of the Infinite, welcome to Chapter 11 of REN-SHEN Half Spirit, Ishiganto. It was yet another uncomfortable night for Steve and Megumi. Megumi seemed to be getting worse with each progressive night. Her tortured sleeps were all-night marathons. She was running away from invisible enemies and calling for her mother and Uncle Taki. They had already experienced too much horror since coming to Okinawa. Steve began to really notice the effect it was having on Megumi and was becoming increasingly concerned about her health, both physically and mentally. He was feeling helpless watching his baby love in such a state. Megumi managed to finally doze off to a dreamless sleep in the morning. The pregnancy was clearly affecting her, but Steve wasn't confident that was all that was making her unwell. It seemed as though coming back home had amplified her negative thoughts and fears. Even the way she moved and her demeanour had changed since she arrived. Steve was feeling an increasingly concerning dilemma. His concerns for Megumi and his unborn child were directly in conflict with staying in Okinawa and ensuring Tanya's safe recovery. The longer we stay here, the more at risk Megumi and our baby are. Sensei. He was in his pristine dojo, dressed in formal clothing in anticipation of the funeral. Sensei was visibly affected by the loss of Uncle Taki. He gestured to Steve to follow him into his office space. He said, "Steve-san, Taki loved you like a son and Megumi like a daughter. He has nobody, and I do not know who else to present this to. Before I was even aware of his passing, it was my intention to award him his Godan, his 5th Dan. He was always talented, and perhaps I didn't recognize his brilliance when Mike and Hiro were training in my dojo alongside him. But he persisted, and in many ways surpassed all of them. Time rewards a focused mind, Steve-san. It would have pleased him very much to receive this. Please accept this on his behalf," as he handed a certificate and belt to Steve. Steve bowed deeply and solemnly accepted them on Uncle Taki's behalf. "This is very dear to me personally, and I thank you deeply for his most worthy award," Steve said. He was well aware Uncle Taki was a 3rd Dan and had jumped 2 grades, which was not normal. But nothing's been normal lately, and he truly deserves it anyway, he thought to himself. Sensei said to Steve, "You know, many people love Taki. I expect a few may attend the funeral to pay their respects to him. Those who loved him here are the ones who continue to resist Kumicho. Some have also learned you were the one who expelled my demons. They agree with me and are calling you Ishiganto's reincarnation. You give them hope." Steve didn't know how to respond. He was uncomfortable being compared to a mythical Chinese general who banished evil spirits. In truth, he had expelled demons, but he was still unsure of the limits of his abilities and his potential. And, to complicate matters, his sense of destiny evaporated the moment he learned his Megumi was pregnant. He returned to Megumi thinking of nothing more than how he wanted to make sure his family was safe and happy. Steve, Megumi, and Sensei, all in black, arrived at the family tomb. It was a serene location situated on a hill in front of a dense forest of trees. Uncle Taki's body would be interred in the central chamber of the traditional Okinawan turtle or womb-shaped tomb. In years to come, after the body fully decomposed, the bones would be washed and placed in a separate chamber, their final resting place. It upset Megumi to even visit the tomb, as her mother's body was not allowed to be placed with her own family. Despite Megumi's protestations at the time, there had been no room for negotiations with her father. Yuta Hinako was already there and was kind enough to clean the tomb and surrounding area. Megumi was both pleased and grateful and thanked her deeply. The funeral was to be a very private affair. The trauma of the death and fear of the evil spirits had affected Megumi and Steve so much that they dispensed with a wake. They wanted to conduct the appropriate ritual with a Buddhist priest as soon as possible to ensure Uncle Taki's safe transition to his afterlife. The Buddhist priest arrived and immediately attended to his duties. rituals and processes, and it gave Steve some sense of relief to see how calm Megumi looked. After a short while, Steve noticed a few people arrived and remained in the distance behind them. The small group gradually increased, and in a short time it seemed as if there were hundreds of attendees. Sensei whispered to Steve, "It appears some of Taki's supporters have arrived." They didn't say a word, but Steve could feel the positive energy from the people who gathered. Every face looked supportive and concerned for them. As the ceremony neared completion, a large black limousine arrived. Some of the supporters at the bank linked their arms and attempted to obstruct the vehicle's advance, but it simply powered forward, paying no attention to the people in its way. The weather had even changed with the car's arrival. Steve wrapped himself around Megumi as if to shield her from the cold. Sensei and Yuta Hinako also instinctively huddled closer to her. Megumi shuddered and looked downwards. She whispered to Steve, "He's here. I know it. I can feel him." Steve suspected the same thing. He turned around to try and see Kumicho, but the windows were heavily tinted and nothing could be discerned. At the completion of the ceremony, the limousine reversed and drove away. Megumi's tension reduced as soon as the car left. She gave Steve's hand a reassuring squeeze to let him know she was fine. Some of the supporters came forward to offer condolences. All were familiar to each other. They handed Megumi okoden, condolence envelopes with money inside. They all knew Sensei, and most seemed to know Yuta Hinako also. But it was more than apparent they all wanted to look at Steve up close. One older gentleman who appeared to be the leader of the group was the first to motion towards Steve. He bowed deeply and quietly and said, "Ishiganto," and pointed his right index finger and touched the inside of his open left palm. Others soon followed, and it wasn't long before the entire group repeated the actions of the first gentleman. They also greeted Megumi warmly and reminded her how loved and admired her mother was. Megumi was touched and shocked by the warmth of the people from her community. She'd always been distanced from these people in her youth and felt slightly awkward in her interactions with them. Steve was confused and embarrassed by the attention. He asked Sensei what the hand signal meant, as he had never seen it before. Sensei said he'd also never seen it, but knew precisely what it meant. "They are calling you Ishiganto. The pointed finger is the evil spirit and the open hand is you, stopping the evil." Sensei continued, "Please understand, Steve. The pain for our people on these islands is still very real. Our own wars and the strong presence of old evil here has forced us to be almost militant against the threat of dark forces. You have seen the Ishiganto monuments everywhere, and you must know how important the Mabui, the essence of yourself, is to people who are afraid of being possessed by the evil spirits. You've given rise to hope in these people." Steve, grieving and confused with the attention, met with the others who approached him. He was cordial and tried to be self-effacing. The group of supporters were extremely polite, but the earnest and sanguine looks clearly indicated they were all desperately looking for someone to believe in. The supporters were all deeply respectful and were mindful not to intrude too heavily on Steve and Megumi in their time of grieving. They all soon left, and Steve, Megumi, Sensei, and Yuta Hinako remained. Hinako was talking with Sensei about the state of the islands and how things had deteriorated in recent times, how people used to see Hinako just to check on their parents in the afterlife or to help find something that was lost. But now they fear for their own souls and come to me to look for ways to expel demons from family members or protect them, she said. Sensei nodded and explained how his life had become a blur over the last few years with his demon possession, and how his recent clarity had given him newfound hope. They both turned and looked at Steve at the same time, and then looked at each other and shrugged their shoulders, saying, "Ishiganto." Steve and Megumi made their own way back to Uncle Taki's home. Megumi seemed much improved. "My baby seems different, relaxed like her old self," Steve thought to himself, as all the sweetest memories of her came flooding back into his mind. He pulled her in close and kissed her head and reminded her how much he loved her. Megumi said, "I really do feel much better. I hated being here all my life because people feared my father so much, and for the same reason feared me." Nobody was completely honest with me because they couldn't be sure if I was going to tell my father or, worse yet, become as bad as my father in the future. But seeing all those people embrace us and feeling their hope when they greeted me showed they don't see me as a threat or a curse to their lives. I think it was beautiful, and Uncle Taki would be proud of us today. Steve said, "Do you really think I can help these people? I don't really know what I'm doing or what I can do. But I could see how much they believed in me. How can they believe in me when I can't even be sure about myself?" Megumi said, "Everything I have ever loved or cherished has been taken away from me by my father. In a way, I've become selfish and secretive about the things I cherish. It has been my way to deal with the life I was forced to live here. I'm now selfish for you and our baby, but I don't want to obsess about it anymore. If we can help these people, maybe this will help cure me. The people looked at me differently today for the first time. It really was lovely and it encouraged me." They reached Uncle Taki's home and found a mountain of flowers in front of the entrance. There were little notes on all of them. Beautiful and thoughtful words from people that Uncle Taki had touched in one way or another. It was overwhelming for Megumi and Steve. Steve hadn't quite grasped how many people Uncle Taki had helped in his lifetime. Steve only knew him for a few years, but he was family to him in every sense. It didn't really occur to him that Uncle Taki had lived such a full life before Steve met him. He touched the hearts of so many people. An amazing man, Steve thought to himself, as the sadness of his loss resonated just as deeply as all his losses over the years. Steve and Megumi quickly collected the flowers, changed their clothes and headed to the hospital to check on Tanya. Soon as they arrived, the hospital staff looked almost fearful as they pounced on Steve and Megumi and tried to be of assistance. The chief hospital administrator arrived within moments to greet them. A small, older woman, a hospital cleaner, was walking behind the administrator and smiled warmly at Steve and Megumi. She discreetly bowed and made the Ishiganto sign whilst looking at Steve, and then said to Megumi, "My sweet Megumi, you look just like your mother did at your age. I used to babysit her. She would be so proud of you." Megumi awkwardly responded, "Thank you so much. Lately I'm learning there are so many people who cared about my mother." The woman replied, "Your side of the family has always been loved, my dear girl." The administrator was clearly annoyed with the cleaner's intrusion and was preparing himself for an announcement before the interruption. He urged the cleaner to move along. With a barely concealed sense of theatre, he explained to Megumi, "Your father was kind enough to donate new, state-of-the-art equipment to assist in Tanya's recovery. He said he was most upset to learn of her unfortunate accident and wanted to assist his daughter's friend in any way possible." Megumi was agitated by the mention of her father and was quick to end any further flattery of him. She was eager to see Tanya. The administrator led Steve and Megumi to Tanya. She was still in her induced coma and nestled among an array of cables connected to a number of monitoring devices. They were both hoping for any sign of positive progress, but she looked no better than the day earlier. Megumi and Steve met the doctor attending to Tanya. He said, "The equipment donated by your father has been extremely helpful to us. We are now very sure our treatment strategy is optimal." Megumi was becoming increasingly annoyed with the mention of her father. "We want to move her to Tokyo as soon as possible. She needs the best care," she said. The doctor responded, "We have the best West German equipment here. In fact, thanks to your father's worldwide connections, we were able to have this equipment supplied overnight. There is absolutely no better place for your friend to be receiving treatment, and she will remain extremely frail for a very long time. I do not advise her to be moved at any time in the foreseeable future." Steve gently pulled Megumi to the side and said, "My baby, we can't move her. That's totally clear. So maybe we should go back to Tokyo so I can look after you the best I can." Megumi shook her head. "No, it's fine. We must stay here. It's best for Tanya, and I'm also starting to think it's best for me. I'm not a little girl anymore. I think I need to be here right now and make peace with this part of my life. I can't have my father interfere and haunt me anymore. I believe in you, my Steve. I think you are greater than any evil, including my father, and I think the people here need their Ishiganto." Steve found it difficult to reconcile Megumi's positivity to the almost manic tendencies she had displayed in recent times. But he was overjoyed to see her in such a positive state of mind. It gave him the confidence to want to stay and ensure Tanya was supported in her recovery. They both talked to Tanya and included her in conversations to try to engage her subconscious mind. It was something they would repeat for many weeks. Steve had been filling his time over the ensuing weeks with helping Megumi, particularly as her pregnancy progressed. Together they were visiting Tanya, and he was also training with Sensei. With regard to the training, initially there was a review of all of Steve's martial abilities, including his kata and fighting skills. But much later, much more time was spent understanding ki and meridians and understanding chinkuchi. Chinkuchi was an interesting concept, particularly as it related to Steve. Conceptually, it was a transference of all the fighter's energy into his opponent. It would almost feel like a shockwave if done correctly. However, Steve's chinkuchi was metaphysical. It was beyond the comprehension of men, including Sensei. It wasn't a shockwave. His lion energy was very far from intangible. It was visible and had proven to do far more than simply shock an opponent. On one occasion, one of the supporters who came to Uncle Taki's funeral brought his son to the dojo with him. He pleaded with Sensei for Ishiganto to help the teenage son who was not studying well and being disrespectful to his parents. Sensei admonished the man for wasting their time and ordered them away. But when he took a closer look at the boy, he noticed the youth was indeed troubled. Sensei called Steve to observe the boy, and Steve sensed the familiar vibrations. Sensei discussed the case at length with Steve. His years of being possessed gave him an insight which few men had. He did his best to describe the vibrations to Steve and how to measure or sense them in a meaningful way. This was obviously a small and relatively innocuous demon, but had the potential to steer this boy to a lifetime of bad choices. These bad choices would be nothing more than invitations to greater demons. Steve grabbed the boy by the shoulders. The petulant youth tried to fight Steve and did his best to break free, but Steve was a powerful man. The boy was not going to be freed until Steve wanted it so. Steve summoned his lion energy and pulsed it through the boy. What appeared to be a small black winged snake was released from the boy's body. Steve summoned his chinkuchi into his foot as he stomped on the winged snake. It hissed before splattering on the dojo floor. The vibrations had gone and the boy, visibly lighter, ran and hugged his father. It was a joyous moment and yet another affirmation of the new legend of Ishiganto incarnate. The exorcisms were repeated numerous times over the following months. Steve was able to gauge the vibrations. He still recalled the totality of Demon Hiro's vibrations and used that as the highest reference for measuring the level of evil trapped inside the human victims. In most cases, Steve was expelling lowly demons. They were simply purposeless souls who gravitated to evil. Others were much more intense. They were clearly soldiers of evil, with clear mandates. On those occasions, Steve noticed Sensei moving in unison with him. Somehow it seemed to assist or intensify Steve's energy pulses. Sensei was definitely on his own path of discovery during the process. Steve, with the aid of Sensei, had finally tuned himself to the presence of demons and their power. He was also able to summon his lion energy and channel it wherever necessary. It could be used offensively and defensively. His skills had developed substantially. Tanya was taken out of her induced coma after a few weeks, and it took a long time before any positive signs were evident. Initially, she had no feeling in her feet and had lost the ability to talk, but the excellent care she received at the hospital and the devoted attention from Megumi ensured her continued recovery. After 6 months, Tanya was talking effortlessly and undergoing rehabilitation to teach her how to walk again. She was doing very well. Megumi's slender body had remained the same from all angles except from the front. The signs of the baby were amply evident. It looked like she had stuffed a basketball under her clothing. Tanya took great delight in discussing everything they would need to do to make sure the baby was perfectly welcomed into the world. The impending birth was the best therapy for her. Steve encouraged Tanya by telling her how important her role was under the Macedonian tradition. "If anything happens to us, it's your duty as a godparent to look after our child, so hurry up and get better," he said. The chief hospital administrator had come to see Tanya, Megumi and Steve with some news he was eager to share. A prominent national news broadcaster wants to deliver a piece about the incredible work we have done in our hospital, particularly in helping you, Tanya. They would like to come here and film you all with this equipment, and it would be a wonderful family event to see you with your father, Megumi, he said. It had been over 6 months and Megumi had successfully managed to avoid her father. Aside from relatively frequent recurring nightmares, Megumi was coping quite well. It was as though Steve's increasing strength and influence as Ishiganto had given her strength and a resistance from the ever-present sphere of evil emanating from her father. Megumi's father had made numerous attempts to contact her. He sent gifts for the baby before most even knew she was pregnant. He sent new cars to her and even keys to another residence in the expensive part of town. All were rejected immediately. It was abundantly evident she wanted absolutely nothing to do with her father. Yet her rejections only seemed to motivate him even further. Megumi didn't put it past her father to have organised the media event. He most likely owned the news broadcaster through some hidden entities with puppet owners offshore. It was all within the realms of possibility for such an impossibly wealthy man. Tanya felt extremely grateful for the treatment she had received. She was willing to support any endeavour which promoted the hospital, but she was mindful of Megumi's strained relationship with her father. She left the decision entirely to Megumi. Much to Tanya's surprise, Megumi agreed to a short segment to be filmed at the hospital. Megumi explained to Tanya how she needed to rise above her personal trauma and try to be of benefit to the people of Okinawa. So many people had embraced Megumi over the 7 months since she had returned, and she wanted to do more for them. She also thought this might be a way to help normalise the tensions which had existed within her community all her life. Steve, in the meantime, had been refining his skills with the assistance of Sensei. His ability to channel his energy was at a level where he could use it with precision, both in relation to power and location. Previously, he would unleash the lion energy and it would just explode forward, glowing bright orange. The changes through training and application also led to a profound understanding of the nature of the energy. Steve's intent was everything. Anger created a different energy pulse from that of a desire to heal. Even the colour would change depending on the intent. Anger was always bright orange. An attempt to heal would be a much more subdued, warm yellow glow. Sensei was truly in awe of Steve's abilities. He did his best to try to distinguish what appeared to be superhuman from that which was man. He encouraged Steve to develop his energies, but he also helped with the gaps in Steve's knowledge of Goju-Ryu. He said gifts such as yours can be a blessing from the gods or even a punishment. In any case, they may disappear one day. You must still persevere with your natural human abilities and ensure you can rely on yourself in every circumstance. Steve understood this, and despite his increasingly full agenda of expelling demons, he trained very hard with Sensei and elevated his Goju-Ryu knowledge to such an esoteric level that only Sensei and few others could truly comprehend. Sensei intended to leave many months earlier, but he had changed his own path in order to fulfill a duty to his community. By helping Steve, he was helping his own people. So he viewed the process as cathartic for both himself and his community. He felt it would be selfish to leave now while they were doing such good work together. Steve would sometimes feel contemplative about his years of training and the events which had occurred in the last few years. Training with Sensei always left a tinge of sadness for him. He was always reminded of Sensei Mike and Uncle Taki and, of course, his father on that fateful day. Everything had always happened so fast, it occurred to him that he had never grieved each death properly. He continually busied himself to avoid thinking about some of the raw emotions which sometimes would creep up on him. On one occasion, after a particularly grueling exorcism, Sensei expressed his desire to formally acknowledge Steve's abilities. He instructed Steve to prepare tea and they both sat together while Sensei made a very formal presentation. He said, "A true teacher is always willing to learn. I've made it my life's purpose to share what I have learned. You've been my greatest student because you have forced me to reassess everything I have learned. I have learned from you and shared all I reasonably can with you. Today, I wish to acknowledge your level within our style and also to thank you for saving my life and the lives of others in my community. I present you with 2 belts. The first, Judan, your 10th Dan black belt for your Goju-Ryu abilities and your honor. and also to acknowledge this path has fully travelled its distance. The second belt, a white one, to remind you that your path as Ishiganto has only just commenced. You must seek more knowledge about your purpose. Perhaps you could find a master in Fujian, China, or perhaps you may find the reason for your gift or your purpose in Macedonia. I cannot know. When you are ready, I believe it will come to you. And finally, I give you this necklace with the two shisa, blessed by one of our most eminent monks, to remind you of your great gift and purpose. As I've mentioned to you before, I intended to leave much earlier, but now I truly feel I have been part of something remarkable here with you. I remain forever grateful for this, but I still suffer guilt from what I did to Hiro. I would like to believe one day we together could banish the demon from Hiro. I learned much about what I did wrong when I summoned Rohan. Seeing your energy and understanding the way of the demons that used to be inside me has given me an insight few people have. It would give me great comfort to try this before I leave, and you must know I want to leave. I lost my mabui, my essence of myself, for too long. Even though I'm old, I need to follow my path, nurture my essence, and clear my way for my next life. Steve felt surprised and elated when he replied, I genuinely did not expect such praise and acknowledgement from you, Sensei. In truth, the events over the last 6 months have given me a focus beyond my Goju-Ryu. The work we've done together to help create harmony on the island has given me so much joy. Before I arrived here, all I could dream about was being able to learn from you. Learn everything from Sensei Mike's Sensei. To be a Judan, a 10th Dan, is a phenomenal achievement. An accolade many aspirants will never achieve, and I do not think I deserve this. But I treasure it deeply. I feel an immense sense of responsibility for both belts you've given me. Thank you very much, Sensei. Steve put the necklace on immediately. It looked like a coin on a black rope. The small medallion had both shisa, one mouth open and one closed, on both sides, and Steve joked, I might need their help one day. Sensei said, I believe anything is possible with you, Steve-san. I think there will come a time when you can summon more than shisa if you open yourself to your path and full potential. Steve was eager to tell Megumi and found her at home looking somewhat anxious. She told Steve how she had agreed to the news segment in the company of her father at the hospital. Steve was absolutely incredulous. He could not believe Megumi would agree to such a request. She'd feared and hated her father the entire time Steve had known her. He was incensed. And now you're willing to feign filial piety to please that evil man. He did it. He won. He finally found a way to get to you, Steve said, instantly regretting his anger at the predicament. Megumi began to cry. I don't know. I just don't want him hanging over me every minute of my life. I don't want that fear and hatred inside of me. When I let him get inside my mind, you see how I've become so much stronger with you by my side. And the more you've helped the community as Ishiganto, the more the love and humanity which binds us all here is growing and growing. Being here has helped me face my fears. I want my father to see that my life is my own now and that I'll never be like him. We will film that news segment in 2 weeks' time and then we will leave. I will help with Tanya's rehabilitation back in Tokyo, and then I can look forward to her company and help with our baby. Steve hugged his wife and kissed her. He said, I understand, my sweet love. I just want you to be happy. If you need to do this, then I'll be right next to you. He placed his new belts next to their bed and Megumi noticed them immediately. She could see the level on the black belt was Judan and seemed to be more excited than Steve about it. He was lying on the bed and she jumped on him shouting, What? Now I can beat up 10th Dan black belts? I'm so strong! As they wrestled and laughed together. Well, friends, that was a bit sad. We had the funeral. We found a community building up around our man, Steve. He's found himself a new name, Ishiganto. The elderly gentleman, the leader, the right finger, the left hand, pointed, bowed. The finger was all the evil, the demons, hitting Ishiganto and getting destroyed. So they've got a lot of faith in our man, don't they? The local community seems to have really embraced him. I think they need him. Sensei Nakandari was very helpful. Sometimes when they were banishing demons, Sensei would do some techniques alongside of Steve or Ishiganto, and assist somehow, creating even more of a bubble of energy. So Sensei definitely developed some skill sets. There's no doubt about that. But our man, Steve, seems to have found his place. In the meanwhile, Megumi was dealing with her issues. She was feeling quite traumatized all her life about how the local community dealt with her. They just thought, oh, she's just part of that demon seed. She's just evil like her father. Or if we do anything wrong to her, the father's going to come and get us anyway. So they had no choice but to just best stay away from her. There's no good to come from any of that. But what did she find out? She found out her mother was loved by everyone in the community, and so was she, although she didn't quite realise it at the time. So that was nice, and it was good to learn for her and encouraging for her. She's quite pregnant now. I think she's getting close to 7 months pregnant. Basketball sitting underneath her still relatively thin frame. Good luck to her. The discussion about losing your essence, your mabui. The Okinawans really place a lot of reliance on that. And something I didn't discuss in the previous chapter is the significance of the yuta, these witches. Yuta Hinako they're the people that basically everyone goes and talks to just get advice and make sure that their ancestors are well looked after and not upset with them, and so they're honouring their people just by going to consult with the yuta, and they try and find out as much as they can and get guidance from these people. So whilst they're spiritual advisors, they're very real about the kind of advice they give. It's very constructive advice, stuff to make you function better in this world that we live in. So they're rated very highly in Okinawa and consulted quite regularly. So Nakandari Sensei was talking about his mabui. He didn't want to lose his spirit. He wanted to find his spirit, regain it. The fear is that you could lose it. And I recall reading about a concept where your spirit can fall out of you, and sometimes the Okinawans will pick it up and put it back in themselves. So it's a bit of a it's very important to them. So I think that's great. I really do. I think it's this concept of how your sense of self that extends to your spirit, your sense of your soul, I guess, acknowledging that in every sense, which is great. Something that clearly is, are we happy with this? Megumi's agreed to the news broadcast, the news segment, in a joint family filming event where the father will attend. Kumicho will be in the presence of Steve and Megumi and Tanya. So that's what seems to be getting organised as we speak. We'll find out in next chapter. I can't imagine anything good will come from that. We'll see. We just don't know yet. We might learn a few things in the process. But all in all, we found out we've got Ishiganto. We're dealing with Steve Nedelkin now, who's in a situation where he has refined his powers, his skills, his ability to control that energy, that line force that shoots out of him. And I think he might need as much of that energy as possible very soon. This is my fear. So luckily, he's had a great sensei in Nakandari Sensei, and he's learnt a lot about himself. He's still grieving. The poor guy, Uncle Taki, just on another long list of people he's lost in his life. And it's kind of forging his identity, I feel. I feel that he's starting to understand his place in this world is to just perhaps set things right. And I feel there's an increasing sort of tension in him. I think he's felt powerless for a bit too long. So let's see where our hero goes with this. He's definitely on a path. We know that. There's no doubt about that. The next chapter is called Kumicho. So I'm very sure we're going to be meeting this person. So I look forward to you joining me here. Please, if you know people that are interested in this sort of book, I had another few great messages pop through and a few great reviews pop up recently. Just so exciting. And you know, to hear people just say, I never would read a book like this, and then I absolutely loved it. I couldn't believe how amazing and how I was not able to put it down. So that's just very heartwarming for someone who wrote the book to hear that. It's just incredible. So that's my buzz, that's my thrill. So if you can share it with anyone else, that's awesome. So if you can't, please tell them to come and have a listen over here. This is good fun as well. Thank you. See you soon.